Sejumlah anggota DPR AS mengkritik tajam strategi pemerintahan Presiden Donald Trump terhadap krisis di Amerika Latin, menyebut keputusan Washington menahan dan memindahkan mantan pemimpin Nicolás Maduro dari Venezuela melalui operasi militer sebagai tindakan yang bertujuan bukan untuk demokrasi tetapi untuk minyak. Mereka juga memperingatkan bahwa jika kebijakan serupa diterapkan terhadap Cuba, itu bisa menjadi bencana besar bagi kawasan dan kepentingan AS. Kritik ini disampaikan dalam dengar pendapat Kongres tentang dampak regional setelah kejatuhan Maduro dan implikasinya bagi negara-negara tetangga.
In this hemisphere, in Cuba and in Nicaragua, the people finally have hope. In Colombia, after President Petro allowed coca crops to reach historic levels for the last 5 years, he visited the White House, met with the president, and all of a sudden, he began fighting the guerrillas in his country. Across the hemisphere, nations are realizing a long-ignored truth that you cannot outsource your sovereignty to the enemies of the United States of America, period. For that reason, the hemisphere is realigning against the dictators, and thank God that Cuba is next. Cuba has always been the epicenter of evil in the Western Hemisphere, unfortunately. Tyranny is their only export. They wrote the manual on repression. But now, with this new done-row reality, the Cuban people are full of hope. They have taken to the streets in more than 200 times in the last month alone. I'm talking about the Cubans on the island. They have even burned down the headquarters of the Communist Party in a city called Moron. Cubans have lost their fear. And even more important, they lost the belief in the invincibility of the Castro regime, which has lived in the soul of every Cuban for the last 65 years. That belief of the invincibility has been shattered by knowing that Donald Trump has not forgotten them. And the good news is that when people lose fear, the dictatorship is about to lose everything. Just days ago, the top Cuban figurehead called Díaz-Canel said on television that he was not leaving power, that he was not going anywhere. Well, Maduro, a few months ago, said the same thing, and look where he is now. For the first time, the entrenched Castro machine is vulnerable. You cannot reform a system that was built on repression. You only have to replace it. And when Cuba finally falls, it will not be the end of something. It will be the beginning of everything for the Western Hemisphere. It will be the last piece of the domino that will unleash the most consequential expansion of liberty in our hemisphere for many generations to come. The communist regime in Cuba is on life support. Trump just needs to pull the plug.
Regarding Venezuela, for example, the president invaded and overthrew the government of a foreign country without coming before Congress for a declaration of war or an authorization for the use of military force. He did not brief Congress before the operation whatsoever. The administration does not get to skip those questions just because the target was someone that we disliked. This operation was not a democracy agenda. In July 2024, the Venezuelan people, against enormous odds, chose Edmundo Gonzalez to be their president. Maduro and Delcy Rodriguez, who the president struck a deal with, stole that election. This administration did not invade Venezuela because it was outraged by that theft, though. And to be clear, I would not have supported an invasion to enforce the results of the election. We know why the president ordered U.S. service members into harm's way. Venezuela's oil, not democracy. Today, President Trump is ordering him to do so again, starting with oil in Venezuela. That is why I, along with Representatives Caston and Senators Van Hollen and Kane, have requested that the Government Accountability Office audit how Venezuelan oil revenues are being collected and used, and also who benefits. Venezuela is not the only country in the Western Hemisphere facing credible threats of U.S. invasion under President Trump. The president has threatened Panama, Mexico, Canada, Greenland, and most urgently, Cuba. And I have no illusions about the nature of Cuba's government. But I do want to say for the record that I suspect after the war in Iran and the embarrassment that the president has suffered, that the president of the United States will likely try to overthrow the Cuban government for what he would consider a quick win. But we cannot ignore our own country's role in the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe in Cuba. 65 years of maximum pressure has not improved the lives of ordinary Cubans. This policy has failed. The Trump administration's latest round of sanctions and its oil blockade are causing direct harm to civilians across the island. I believe the president went into Venezuela because he saw it also as an easy win. And after the embarrassment that he's now facing, as I mentioned, I believe that he will pursue Cuba. And that would be a catastrophe for the Cuban people, for the region, and for the United States, where Americans, quite honestly, are sick of more war.
President Trump has made clear that we will not tolerate this threat on our doorstep any longer. Now is the time for drastic political and economic reforms in Cuba. Our vision is for a hemisphere that prevents mass migration, counters narco-terrorist groups, remains free of hostile foreign incursion, and generates economic opportunity for everyone in the region.
Let's go to Cuba. A Russian tanker called Anatoly Kolodkin was able to deliver close to 750,000 barrels of oil to Cuba. Why did we allow for that tanker to break the siege that we had created around Cuba? Why?
I think, as the president said, he did it as a one-time exception, as a way of helping on the humanitarian front. I would note that while that sounds like a considerable amount of fuel, it's about 7 to 10 days worth for normal usage in Cuba. So it's not a deal breaker. We've got very strong control on that.
Chairwoman, in your opening statements, you celebrated the fact that, quote, the Cuban regime is on life support. Madam Chairwoman, I would say that I was in Cuba less than a week ago, and that the Cuban people are on life support, not the Cuban government. It's time to abandon a 6-decade-old failed policy that inflicts disproportionate harm on the Cuban people. The Trump administration policy towards Cuba is not new. This is now going on the 4th generation of people in our hemisphere, 90 miles off of our shore, that know nothing about the generosity of the American people. We have engaged in collective punishment. What we are seeing is a doubling down on a failed policy of deliberately depriving the Cuban people of access to basic life necessities like fuel, imports, with the hope that they will rise up and overthrow their government out of discontent. This hasn't worked for 64 years, and it is magical thinking to believe that it will work now.
Jelajahi cara baru mendapatkan informasi. Download MetroTV Extend sekarang.